Everyone, and Eid Mubarak to everyone who's celebrating, and welcome to the first in our new series of Bristol 24/7 Presents, where for Mental Health Awareness Week, we're focusing on Bristol's response to burnout and how it can make us leaders in wellbeing. My name is Safiya and I'm the editorial assistant at Bristol 24/7. So this week is Mental Health Awareness Week, and the conversations that we're having today feel extra relevant. Mental health problems are very common in the workplace, and how we experience them is changing amid the pandemic. In the UK, 70 million workdays are lost every year due to mental health problems. Employers need to be able to create safe spaces for employees where it's possible to have open and authentic conversations around mental health. So to give you an idea of what's coming up over the next hour and a half, we'll start by sharing a short film discussing today's topic at hand with opinions from business members and other organisations across the city. We'll then go straight into our panel discussion, where there'll be an opportunity for you all to send in questions to our guests around mental health and the workplace. If you have any questions that you'd like to put forward to a panellist today, then you can tweet them to @Bristol247 or use the hashtag Bristol247presents, and I'll raise them during the discussion today. We've already been sent in a few questions by our readers, so I'll be putting this to panellists later. We'd like to take the opportunity to thank our public and business members for supporting independent journalism in Bristol and helping Bristol 24/7 to host these Presents events. We could not do this without your support. So if you'd like to support Bristol 24/7 personally or via the organisation that you work for, then head over to bristol247.com/betterbristol to learn more. So let's start with the video from our Bristol 24/7 members and businesses across the city.
Now, from the conversations that I've had with various companies, there's been two big challenges for them. So the first one is knowing and understanding, that's the key bit, the mental health of your staff and that sort of baseline that you can then track over time. The second challenge is actually accessing mental health support for your staff, making sure that it's right compared to what current models do, such as employee assistance programs that give your staff access to support based on availability, not matching to the right therapist. Question two, what do you think needs to change? Now, as I mentioned before, I think understanding the well-being of your staff is really important. Clearly, that's because it can, increase productivity when they're feeling happier. But also, it's good practice to do that, to create a culture that you care. And I think it's really important that organisations don't just think of it as a monetary cost, but as an investment in the future of your culture and also the well-being of your staff. But also understanding that change over time is really important, as that's something that you can measure and actually have some tangible results to go to board of directors about, for example.
I think the hardest part of supporting staff during the pandemic has been that we just simply haven't been around each other. We haven't been there in person to be able to spot some of the triggers or put in place that support ourselves.
So what's been difficult about supporting staff during the pandemic is the loss of tangible, connected spaces where we can sense what's going on for each other. What we need to change as a result of this is becoming better at recognising when people are struggling with their well-being and when their stress levels are rising, and that takes conversations and line management, and it takes preventative work, so staff understanding what it looks like when they're struggling before they're struggling.
What is the one thing your company organisation has done to support staff? Right in the beginning of the pandemic, we launched I'm Community, which is a company-wide initiative where we do webinars, talks, activities, exercise classes to help people with their well-being, their mental health, social connectivity, and that's still ongoing now.
We're a mental health organisation supporting young people. So clearly we're all about wellbeing, and one of the ways in which we organisationally have supported our staff and also our volunteers has been to create a buddy scheme. So the idea here being that two people are matched together at random. They may not necessarily kind of overlap in terms of their work. They may not even know each other that well, but they're matched together, encouraged to talk. Work chat is actively discouraged. It's meant to be a social thing. And so for me and my buddy, we had phone calls at first and video calls. Then we went for walks in Victoria Park. That was very lovely. And I'm pretty sure, we're going to go to the pub as soon as we can. The feedback's been really cool. It's been really well received, and I think we'll probably continue to do that after lockdown as well. Cheers.
One thing we did as an organisation that was very much led by our principal was to set up a partnership with a specialist practitioner, a local counselling centre, the Somerset Counselling Centre. Staff were also at the same time given the time and the resource to explore mental health and develop their own strategies. One of the key initiatives that we set up were staff MOTs, where staff are able to book in with a wellbeing specialist, just a 45-minute session to talk about their own wellbeing, but also discuss strategies about how to tackle some of the challenges that they were facing. At the same time, we also put in a number of physical wellbeing activities, both remotely throughout the pandemic and in person as we've returned to the campus, as we are very much aware of the link between physical and mental wellbeing.
What would be great to be changed would be to use technology to our advantage to incorporate mini wellbeing ideas. And for example, I love the idea of walking meetings. So how can technology be adapted to incorporate those small breaks during the day, during the working routine? What we've done differently this year as a team is have outdoor team meetings, which have proved really popular and enable us to have that space away from our screens and give that real time to our planning.
What do you think needs to change? I'm not sure I got anything specific that needs to change. I would say, though, that during the pandemic, everyone's is a lot more open about their mental health and their well-being, and everyone's talks, and everyone is more aware of what other people need. So I don't think we need to change that. We need to carry on that, and we need to keep going with that and carry on being more open and honest and keeping conversations flowing.
We so often think of resilience as being an individual trait that can be increased through individual interventions like mindfulness. But psychologists now define resilience as being the capacity of a system, deliberately not referring to the capacity of individuals. The change I would like to see is us trying to increase the resilience of our environments in order that all individuals are able to thrive. Thank you.
And thank you to everybody who contributed there. Again, if you'd like to tweet about this event, please go ahead and use the hashtag Bristol24/7presents. Now, if all goes smoothly with technology, which hopefully it will, it's time to welcome our 4 amazing panellists onto the screen. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to have you here with us today. I hope you can all hear me okay?
Yeah. Hello.
Great. Hi, everyone. So this is live. Another reminder that you can send in questions via Twitter, so please do. And I'm very pleased to introduce our guest for today's panel. We have Bianca Jones, who is a qualified mental health first aid England instructor who delivers wellbeing and mental health training to businesses to improve mental health throughout organisations. Hello, Bianca.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We've got Jess Borthwick from Changes Bristol. Changes Bristol provides support to those in mental distress in Greater Bristol. Jess supports staff and volunteers as well as designs and delivers training. Hi, Jess.
Hello.
We've got Camilla Rigby, who is the founder of Women's Work Lab and has a passionate belief that all mothers should be supported to achieve their potential. The organisation supports unemployed mums back into the workplace through training to build confidence, ambition and employability skills. Hello, Camilla. And last but not least, we've got Daisy Roach, who is the head of HR at Better Food. Daisy has a passion for wellbeing and mental health after working for more than 10 years in HR and people. Daisy focused her studies at university on mental health discrimination in the workplace and is a champion for the need for wellbeing support. Hi, Daisy.
Hi.
So today, the focus of our event is burnout and mental health in the workplace. It's something that I'm sure we've all been thinking about a lot more than normal over the course of the pandemic, where Zoom fatigue, job losses, isolation are taking a huge toll on workforces across Bristol and the world. So We want to know from these experts what employers are doing to catch up with the global impact of the pandemic for staff's wellbeing. It's probably best to start with current challenges that workforces are facing amid the pandemic. So I know that I've struggled with a work-life balance when my office is my home, and there's less space for face-to-face interactions. Bianca, could I go to you first? So would you be able to reflect on the current situation and what changes that you might have noticed among workforces during the pandemic?
Yeah, so I think during the last year with COVID, lockdown, there's been a lot of insecurity and, like you said, a lot of isolation, which breeds depression. So I've seen a change. I've seen workplaces giving employees more autonomy, which helps well-being and mental health, so more control around their hours and how they plan their day and how they organize their workload, which helps people, right? I've also seen an increase in education as well, and resources around actually how do we look after this brain of ours? Because what we get taught quite young is, and everyone's nodding, how to look after our physical health, right? Yeah, fruit and veg, water, exercise. We get this rammed down our throats at quite a young age, but actually how to look after this is a very different story. So I'm delighted that now I'm seeing an increase in all this education and awareness and resources of actually how do we look after this brain of ours and our brain health and our mental health as well. So I've seen an increase of that in companies as well, lots of campaigns around awareness, well-being, self-care, an increase in things that people can do online together, whether that's crafts, yoga, all these opportunities for people to try new things as well, because all these tools in our toolbox for well-being, a lot of it is trial and error as well. So we need to try things to see if it works for us, because some things are not for everybody. Mindfulness, for example, meditating, not everybody will get on with these things, and that's okay. It's on to the next thing then to see what works for you. And back to it being Mental Health Awareness Week, the theme this week is very much nature. So, going for a walk, actually paying attention on your walk, noticing the trees, looking up at the sky, things like that can be really useful, particularly at the beginning of possible poor mental health, when we can help ourselves. So that's the main difference. I'm seeing a lot of increase in, workshops, education, information and resources in the workplace as well, which I think is great and moving in the right direction as well.
Yeah. Have you tried anything new yourself over the pandemic?
Well, my well-being toolbox. I have a lot of things in mind. I particularly enjoy essential oils. With me, it's my senses. So what I smell really impacts my well-being. So I like doing recipes with essential oils, walking. So I walk around my local park when I can, and yoga. So I follow yoga. I have a child. She's nearly 5. So I do what I can when I can, which is my motto. I don't put too much pressure on myself, because I've seen where people put these massive goals of a 10-mile jog, and actually it's not realistic to their fitness levels or their capabilities. So my motto and what I advocate for people is to do what they can when they can, and really just trial and error with all the things that are out there. I've seen an increase in holistic things as well. So I'm talking about mindfulness, massage, Reiki, all these kind of things I've seen taking off as well. And that could be to do with the stretched mental health services. So a lot more people are empowering themselves and taking care of their well-being themselves, particularly at the initial stages. So this is all really positive and moving in the right direction. But I always say, try mindfulness. You can use apps like Headspace, Insight Timer, and Calm, really good apps to try it. But don't force yourself to like it. The brain is a muscle, and it is something that we also need to practice as well.
Yeah, thank you. I've been trying and maybe not succeeding that well at Headspace, but I might give it another go. Camilla, would you agree? What changes have you seen amid workforces over the pandemic? I think that one of the noticeable changes that impacted a lot of the women that we're working with generally was offices closing. And I think that if you're in a professional job where you already perhaps had a fair amount of flexibility in your life, and you have a house that's got a space that you're able to go and work from home, then I think those professionals, I think, have been able to make those adjustments quite quickly. But when you're talking about the women that we work with who have often been out of work for a long time, or have been doing roles that are not possible to do in an office essentially, but young people as well who might be starting out in their career, I think it's been a really massive change for a lot of them, and not in a good way. You know, they've been working from their bedrooms essentially, because that might be the only space they've got in their house to work. And I think linked to the working from home piece, and we're just gearing up to start another one of our programs, but we've been watching closely the statistics relating to domestic violence as well. And I think that a lot of people, again, if you're not living it, you don't really understand, but going to work for a lot of women is a safe space, and it's a reason that they can get out of the house and they can be somewhere where they feel safe day in, day out. And when that's been taken away from you for quite a long time, the knock-on effect of that to someone's mental health is pretty extreme actually. And it's not just the mental health, but the safety actually of these people. So I think domestic violence is one area that we're really concerned about. But secondly, and I speak as a mum of a child who's got additional needs. Well, my son's autistic and has ADHD. The mental toll of homeschooling and being with a child with additional needs 24/7 is really extreme, and it's then trying to work around your child as well. So it's hard enough being a parent doing the homeschooling thing. I absolutely think that every parent deserves to, the recognition for that juggle in the first place. But then adding into that a child who's got really complex needs, for which homeschooling isn't, anything that is kind of come easy, and they're very reliant on the support and everything that they get from school. That has also really affected people's mental health. The mums, again, that we're working with, myself included. And also linked to that, the last thing I wanted to add is, in a positive, and Bianca, you're really positive, and so I don't want to be kind of doom and gloom on it. But in a positive, and again, I can probably link my own experience to it, is that I know of a lot of mums who have actually started to take their mental health a bit more seriously, and actually really started to investigate some challenges they might be having with their mental health. And I was diagnosed towards the end of last year with ADHD, having suffered from anxiety and mental health challenges for a long time actually. And I've been reading more and more that a lot of mums in particular, especially mums who've got children perhaps who are autistic and other neurodiverse things, have actually the pandemic has been that extra catalyst actually of like, enough's enough, I cannot continue in this way. And for me, it's been a bit of an awakening actually, that, you get pushed to that point for so much, that actually I'm recognizing that this is not a kind of regular, I feel a bit, under the pressure, all the rest of it. So I think that for me, the three things for mums in particular, and the mums that we're working with, is around the accessibility to working from home. And actually it's really pushed a lot of people to a place where they really shouldn't be, and that's young people as well. The second thing is around domestic abuse, which is, as I say, it's increased. I should have the numbers to hand. It's increased so much over the last year and a half, and the safe space that a lot of women have relied upon before has gone. And that's really something that we're excited as things start to open back up again. And then the final thing is around, as I say, children with additional needs, and perhaps mums who might have additional needs themselves but haven't actually realised up until now. So those are some of the things that we've been reading and talking about a lot more in the Women's Work Lab. Yeah, thanks, Camilla. You made some really interesting points, and I definitely want to, go back later in the conversation and ask in more detail about some of them. But for now, moving forward, I guess most of us are likely to see a continuation of these changing work habits. Working from home, for many of us, is likely to become more normal in the future, and we're learning to have a more flexible approach to the working day. So, Jess, could I ask what you and Changes Bristol are doing to support staff and volunteers who might be facing mental distress, particularly in the working place?
Yeah, it's been an extraordinary time, really. Our team has been working from home primarily, which is it has its pros and cons, as we've discussed. I think for many people, as Camilla was saying, if you have a garden and a home office, it might actually be quite a pleasant thing. But if you're working out of your bedroom, it's a challenge. And I think I've spoken to a lot of people, and the feeling is the problem is not that they're always at home. The problem is that they're always at work. And so it becomes really difficult to switch off. And also there can be a sense of isolation. One of our staff members recently referred to it as the bunker where they've been working. And often I think when we're disconnected from our colleagues, our workmates, self-esteem problems can come in, a sense of that you're alone, that your work doesn't matter, all of that can kind of creep in. So we've been doing lots to sort of support our staff team and our volunteers. Really just a big part of it is regular check-ins. So we have a team meeting every week, and then also a check-in every week as well, which is a separate meeting, which is really a place where we just ask how each other are as human beings. And we're encouraged not to talk about work as much as possible. It's a place where we really just get to show up as human beings. Also, we've kind of, and this has sort of happened organically, but it's also kind of how our team is set up, that we have teams of people, and we've created kind of a buddy system where we check in on one another, we call one another. Certainly myself and my colleague, it's been a lifeline for me during the pandemic, just to know that if I'm having a bit of a tough day, there's someone I can call and she'll get it. She'll really get the full picture of it. So that's been really huge. We've seen triple the amount of people using our services through the pandemic. And so there's a real sense that people are reaching out to peer support as a way of managing their mental health, especially in the early stages, as Bianca was saying. There's a real benefit to actually just remembering that there are people out there who feel the same way, and you're not alone. That can be huge. But certainly my contact with volunteers has gone way up as well. I'm having phone calls with them more frequently, more emails, and often I'm hearing back from them, oh gosh, it was just so good to talk to someone. It was just so good to be heard. And I think that's true for so many of us. And I think we have this idea of a work-life balance, and it's all been thrown off this year. But I think there's even something important to understand about this, in that when we talk about work-life balance, we sort of think of work as the stressful thing and life as the fun thing. But life also contains stress, and especially this year, like no other. And so what happened to me, I recently moved and then got a puppy a week later, which was questionably wise, but also joyful. And so I took a week off work in order to kind of deal with that massive life event. And I came back to work after a week off, and my colleague said, "Oh, how was your holiday? Did you have a nice rest?" And I dragged myself into work and was like, "I haven't slept. I still live among boxes." So this idea that somehow when we're off work, we're having a lovely time, and when we're working, it's difficult. That isn't always the case. We're dealing with stress in various areas of our lives. And so, and I think it's become compounded this year because of the general stresses of living through a pandemic. So yes, lots of thoughts really about what we can be doing. But certainly for me, one of the major differences is just having those regular check-ins where I know that I'm being heard and seen and valued by my colleagues. It's been huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Daisy, what about you? What do you think that employers can and should be doing to look after their workforces and avoid burnout during this weird time?
Well, so we're coming from it from the opposite side, really, because as a food retailer, we've been open as an essential business throughout the entire time. So, our staff have faced not necessarily completely different challenges, but a slightly different side of things. So they've still been coming to work. There's still that sense of normal, but there's the additional fear, there's the additional anxiety, there's, right, everyone else has been told to stay at home, but I have to come to work. How does that affect me? Am I safe? Am I doing the right thing? Should I be here? Should I not be here? And then that creates a whole other side of burnout and stress that being at home wouldn't necessarily give you, because you're at home and you're safe. but it does, I've been very fortunate to be able to continue a sense of normality, because I have to go into the building to be able to do work sometimes. So my working life is therefore fairly normal, compared to everybody who's been stuck at home for the last year. But it's just, I think the main thing is that we can't forget that, an organisation will decide what's best for all of its employees, but all of its employees are individuals and they will all respond to these things differently. We can't get away from the fact that everybody in the world is currently living through this mass trauma of COVID. And that will have massive effects on populations, on individuals, on groups of people, and on businesses and employers. And I think the best way to help is to realise that everybody will react to this differently. Some people, will knuckle down and be like, right, I've got something to focus on. I'm getting to come to work. For me, my life is not as affected as other people's. Some people have that additional fear and anxiety about their safety, about what they're doing. Some people will be really worried about, the PPE, the side of things, having to wear a mask all the time and having that sense of panic because things are normal but not normal. It's, the world changed overnight, and I don't, everybody will deal with that differently. So it's just about being able to understand that everybody will have different needs, and different things. They will need different things to be able to support them during that time, whether that be with their mental health, with burnout, whether or not they need to be in, or actually they want to take some time out. The furlough scheme was great last year because it enabled us to be able to support employees with emotional burnout by offering them furlough. So, people who have, dependents who live far away, or, family who are essentially extremely vulnerable, and then they worry about it. Because we all say, you can leave your problems at the door when you come to work, but you can't with people, you can't just switch it off and switch it on again. And if you want your people to do the best they can, they have to feel the best they can.
Yeah, absolutely. Bianca, I want to ask you the same question as a mental health first aider and someone who goes to different organisations. Like, what advice do you give to employers to help with their employees surrounding mental health and burnout in particular?
I think it goes back to what Jess said about giving people a safe space to be able to have a conversation. And I think it's about letting people know that it's okay, first of all, to not be okay, that cliche saying around mental health, and that it is okay not to be okay, and that we're human beings and it's natural to feel everything that we're feeling. All the things with COVID is anxiety inducing. So no wonder why the rates of diagnosis have gone through the roof. Like I said earlier, isolation breeds depression. So no wonder why that's gone through the roof. So it's about counteracting some of these things with groups, with that connection, with that safe space for talking. A lot of companies that I've worked with, I do consultation for as well, and they've done what's called a buddy to vent to. So at the end of your day, if you're at home, you have that 5-minute check-in at the end of the day where you vent and the other person vents, and then that's it. Work done, because it's hard to separate, as has already been mentioned, when you're working from home as well. So I think that's a really good thing. I've also helped companies implement pulse surveys, which are a weekly survey, 5-6 questions, and this is just to gauge where your employees are, how they're feeling. That was during the pandemic, and returning them to the workplace. Pulse surveys are short and sharp to the point, and they can help you gauge where your employees are, so then you can act quicker as well. So that's a really good idea. And also using things like emojis or weather, for example, for people who aren't very good about expressing their feelings or haven't increased that self-awareness yet, because not everybody wants to talk about their mental health and their feelings, and it can be really difficult for some people in the workplace as well. So using things like a traffic light system, red, green, amber, where do you think you are today, 1 to 10. Anything where someone doesn't have to actually verbalize things could be quite useful as well, just to find out where somebody is. So all those kind of tools and techniques together of the having somebody to vent to, having safe spaces where you can just go and talk to people, having a kind of system where you can gauge where your employees' well-being is, can be useful as well. So all these things together, and again, I'm a real advocate for education. I wouldn't do what I did if I wasn't. So I really do feel like empowering people to be able to build that self-awareness, realize when actually this isn't low mood, actually this is poor mental health, because as Camilla said, there's a real difference. Yeah, we're not supposed to be happy all the time as human beings. If someone was happy all the time, that would just be really annoying, really, if we thought about it. It's quite natural to experience low mood, but actually it's noticing when it's going on for longer and it's starting to affect your day to day. As we've already mentioned, everybody's so unique, and a lot of people compare themselves. But it's about you. It's about when it's affecting your day to day and your ability to cope. It's you. It's so individual. And that's when you need to start to get some sort of help. And again, a lot of self-help is what I advocate and do a lot of training around, is that self-help, trial and error, empowering yourself to look after this, because it's all linked, our mental and our physical and our social health as well. It's all our well-being. It's not just our mental health that is our well-being, it's everything. It's what we intake in our eyes, what we see, what we hear, listening to the news all the time. All these things are what we intake. So it's just educating people around that. And if they have to put boundaries in place, which is a great tool. Yeah, self-care can just be just saying no. So I advocate for all of this, really. Boundaries, self-care, I think, is vital. So if employers can encourage that as well, people to charge their batteries and actually take time off. So no contact after a certain time, no work emails, actually having that downtime and recharging your battery is so vital. And particularly, as Camilla said, if you're a mother, I'm a single parent, and that's got its added layers through COVID, where I had my own struggles to manage, a business that's 4 years old and my child that's nearly 5. So I had to be really good at my boundaries and really good at my self-care to be able to keep going and to keep my well-being, the quality of my mental health at a certain place. So I just really think education, information, resources, and actually the workplace being a part of this as well. Because you can do courses, anyone can do courses, but it's really about what you do after, isn't it? Yeah, it's about how you embed it after, how you really implement this through your culture, through your people. So that's what I'm passionate about. And I'm glad that I'm seeing an increase of it. But we do need to acknowledge that there are certain groups that were disproportionately affected by COVID and lockdown. Already mentioned by Jess, if somebody perhaps didn't have outside space, was in a high-rise building, perhaps with children, for example, no childcare, all these elements we need to factor in as well.
Yeah, thank you. And same question to you, Camilla. And then I'd also like to add, going back to your previous points as well, is how important is it to view burnout as a gendered issue?
Yeah, I'm always a bit, so I have to check myself quite a lot actually about, I exist in a world of mums first and foremost, so I talk a lot about mums, and actually there are a lot of people who aren't mums through choice or sometimes not through choice, and so I've got to really, I'm always trying to check myself actually to not always go down just that route. And actually the gendered side of things is a really tricky one as well. I've got a half brother who's 21, just about 22, and he's recently lost, his very good friend took her own life very recently, and it was a real reminder actually that I live and breathe, I think, the challenges that mothers face, because that's my world. And actually, but speaking to my brother and really getting a proper insight into how tough it really is for young people as well, boys and girls, and I think it's, I could sit here till the cows come home literally saying how tough it is for mums, and it really is, and don't get me wrong, I think it's remiss though to try and pull it down to gender actually, and also even age, because I think that this pandemic and the way that it's affecting everybody in different ways shouldn't be underestimated. So I'm really happy to do it from mum's perspective, but I think with my broader lens on as well, I think that young people in particular are also very disproportionately affected by everything that's happening. So yes, from a mum's perspective, the mother's load that everybody talks about a lot, I think that, as Bianca says, single mums in particular have really carried this massive burden for the last year and a bit. As it was, we know that single parents, I think the statistic, and again, I should have had these written down properly, 85% of single parents are women. The number of single mums in particular who are able to work, that then falls down even further. Of those mums who are working, those that are able to progress in their career, that's another big challenge that goes into that. And so if you've got a single mum that is working, she has all of these massive, this intersectionality of all of these huge barriers that are facing her all of the time. And then a pandemic strikes and she's suddenly on her own, and she's having to homeschool a child on her own as well. And so, or children on her own. So again, it's yes, mums in particular have had this extra burden to carry. I would highlight single mums in particular have had it particularly hard out of everybody. So I think that where we are now, I think I'm probably the same as a lot of other people, is that it feels a bit weird, doesn't it, right now? And that we're suddenly, everything's gone from like being really rubbish and horrible, and everyone's like, oh, I just want it to open up again. And now everything's starting to open up again. And that's almost bringing another type of stress, if I'm honest with you, just in terms of like, God, I've got even more. And again, when you've got a slightly chaotic neurodiverse brain like I've got so many things to remember, but actually realistically forget. And so it's all these added stresses that are coming back in again as well. So this slightly in-betweeny time, I'm actually anxiety's beginning to rise again, just from I'm going to start dropping balls left, right and centre, and everyone's expectations have gone right back up again, because I think we're all like, oh, it's all normal again now. And it's not. We're still in a pandemic and life is still really weird. And yes, the expectation, I think, is probably on mums a lot of the time to hold it together. And I think that's the bit where I personally struggle. And I know that a lot of other mums do, because I struggle with that kind of thing, full stop. But single mums are the ones that I think deserve the biggest space right now in terms of over what's been going on for the last, if we are going to make it gendered, frankly, they would be the people that I'd like to have the spotlight on, and all the recognition actually for what they've had to go through.
Yeah, I agree. And it is, I guess, also important to note that all of these things, for everyone working from home, in terms of the workplace, balancing a million things, it's really hard and can be really challenging for the mental health. But as we mentioned before, there are some good things about it as well. For example, like flexibility in the working day. Have any of you found that some positives with the people that you've been working with around, like spending more time at home, spending more time with their kids, for example? Yeah, Jess.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a funny one, isn't it? Because like flexible working is generally, I think, a really good thing. I think for a long time, there have been lots of organizations or lots of companies saying, oh, well, we can't hire you if, certainly I think a lot of people in the disabled community are suddenly being able to have access to work, because employers are doing the work to make their workplaces accessible. And lots of people who've been previously barred from working all of a sudden have opportunities, which is really exciting. In that it can be flexible, you can take breaks, you can stop and go for a walk in the forest if you need to, you can pick your kids up from school. I think there is also perhaps a danger a little bit to flexible working, in that I've heard of people getting up at 5 a.m. to work before they take their kids to school, do homeschooling, and they're working till 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. to try and meet the deadline, respond to the client, whatever it is, and juggle a life around it. So I think there's pros and cons. It's beautiful that there's more flexibility, and I hope that's the thing that stays in our kind of working culture, because it does make workspaces more accessible. But I think we are still in the early stages of figuring out the edges of this. And I think we need to also put in place quite strong boundaries around not working too much, because most of the people I know say that it's really hard to stop working at the end of the day. It's really hard to not answer emails on the weekend. And so, yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword slightly, but I am really excited to see workplaces becoming more disability friendly, more like parent friendly, more student friendly. There's lots of benefits here. Just we need to make sure we're managing it properly.
Yeah, definitely. And Daisy, what's it like for your workforce? Because obviously, like you said, you're coming from a different perspective here, where everyone is still going into the workplace. Have you had anyone kind of, what's their side been to it? Any positives?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said earlier, there's some sort of sense of normalcy. So, people who are at home with people, like, for example, I live with my friend. They've been working from home for more than a year now. I think we probably would have killed each other had it not been that I was able to go out and go to work like normal. So that's probably sort of had that kind of lift as a positive. Obviously, they're still able to come in and socialize with their teams, so they can see all the people that they're used to seeing day to day. They're still getting all their benefits. So we provide a staff lunch for all our teams, so they still are able to come in and have an organic healthy meal every day, and get out of the house, which I think has been something that people have struggled with. I was really unwell with COVID last year myself. Didn't leave the house for 3 weeks, and then it was like, I don't need to leave my house. And then you forget that actually you need to leave your house, even if it's just for the sake of your mind. But then obviously we've had people shielding who are extremely vulnerable. And so there's, that balance there with trying to make sure that you're continuing to look after your teams who are in store and keep them safe, and then also deal with, trying to keep people who have no choice but to be at home involved and supported. And so it's a balancing act. I mean, in terms of what you were saying about gender, I think that actually you'd be talking about single parents, single mums, a large proportion of service workforce, so food retail, clothing retail, restaurants, bars, etc. They're the kind of jobs that you can't do from home, and they tend to be female heavy jobs. So, in terms of the people who have not been able to work full stop, rather than just working from home, I do feel like that has probably affected women and those who identify as women more than others, if you're talking about generalizations. And I think the decision last year to not have to comply with the gender pay gap reporting because of COVID was actually a really missed opportunity, because I think that really would have really highlighted that actually furlough, closure of hospitality, closure of shops is going to adversely affect women and people who identify as women more so than everybody else.
Yeah, great. So moving on slightly, we did cover a little bit, how, it can affect different people more than others, looking particularly at women, people who identify as women. Bianca, you're currently working on a program that looks at this in terms of race. So can you tell us more about how burnout and mental health is perhaps also, a race issue as well?
Yeah, so if we look at the last year, it's highlighted a lot of disparities, vulnerable groups, hasn't it? Like we've all mentioned. But if we look at the last year and we look at COVID, we look at lockdown, we look at actually COVID was affecting Black and brown people more, because all the jobs that you just mentioned, Daisy, customer facing, also really relevant to Black and brown people as well. Historically, there's reasons for that.
100%.
Over to help rebuild after World War II, the Windrush generation, with helping with trains and nurses. So there's reasons why Black and brown people are in those front-facing roles as well. We also need to acknowledge that if a Black and brown person did actually get COVID, they were also, I think it's 40% more likely to actually die as well. So we had that to deal with. We had the inequalities with housing, the inequalities with benefits and all these other things on top of that as well. And then we had the rise of the BLM movement as well. So we need to think of the last year and actually where the mental health and well-being of Black and brown people could be because of the result of the last year's events. So over the last year, I was already doing training around what systemic racism actually is, because a lot of people think that it's the name calling, but it's so much more than that. It's structural. So I do a lot of training around that and cultural awareness, how to be culturally competent in regards to mental health and well-being as well. But what I've realized is that companies wanted more, particularly over the last year, to look after their Black and brown employees. So it's almost like a chain reaction happens. Something that I was doing already, there was an opportunity to create a more robust course for companies and everybody to get an education around the different stressors and factors that impact Black and brown people, how we've got to where we are today with race relations, particularly focusing on England, because I've noticed there's a complete lack of understanding around actually what's going on. And a lot of people are like, oh, BLM just happened overnight. No, this is 400 years of oppression and racism. And yes, it's not covert, but it's still there. It's just hidden. So I do a lot of training to help everybody in a company get to a baseline of understanding, because once everybody's at that baseline, then you can start to do improvements and start to possibly deconstruct and make changes to possible outdated, possible racist policies that are still upholding a racial hierarchy. So I've got my digital course, which is called Race Ahead, and it's accessible. It's 10 hours in 4 modules, and I'm in a lot of talks at the moment with different organisations about supporting them to implement this training, and also individuals can access it as well, just if they want to do this for their personal or professional development themselves. But I'm really excited about it, and I can see that it's well needed, and it's just an extension of what I was doing already, really. But yeah, we do need to acknowledge the disparities that have been caused by systemic racism, and actually the effect and the impact that the last years had on Black and brown people in particular. And yes, we do need to acknowledge other vulnerable groups as well, like single mothers, like elderly, like LGBTQ plus community, for example. And for some, the racism will be compounded again within that as well.
Yeah. Have you had many conversations with Black and brown employees about how this past year in particular has been, really taking a toll on their mental health?
Yeah, so if we think about some of the stressors that may vary from the majority, which the majority I'm talking about here is white skin, we've got added stressors like tokenism, feeling used, gaslighting, being told that what's happening isn't really happening, racism, discrimination, being treated differently, being treated unfairly. And this was before COVID on a day-to-day basis, which can lead to what I call racism burnout, right? Because if you're, being weathered, experiencing this exclusion and this, this discrimination daily, it can really affect somebody's mental health and well-being. Now you add in COVID disparities, highlighting and, bringing everything out to the surface that is already wrong. It's not a pretty picture. And there was a lot of fear. So, for example, Black women are 1/3 of them will be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, usually generalized, which is anything and everything, or an increase as well in Black women for social anxiety. There's high reports of imposter syndrome in Black females in particular, you know, not feeling like they should be where they are or feeling like they're going to be found out. There's a high anxiety, high fear. A lot of Black people and brown people living in their fight, flight, freeze system part of their brain, you know, that can lead to hypertension, high blood pressure, heart disease, all these other physical illnesses then can come in. So there were things already there, and COVID has just made things worse, if you like.
Yeah, definitely. So moving on a little bit, we're going to talk about how, you know, over the past year during the pandemic, our world has turned, you know, almost entirely digital. And Jess, I wanted to ask you what that would mean for people who might be digitally excluded.
Yeah, this has been a thing that we've been coming up against quite strongly at changes. So previously, all of our, we had one service, it was a support group service, and they were all running in person. So we had 12 groups running across the city every week. And of course, everything changed when COVID came along, and we took all of our groups online, which for some people was no big deal. For other people was a bit unfamiliar, but they got to grips with it. And for other people was entirely inaccessible, whether that's not having the technology, not having a reliable internet connection, not feeling confident using the technology, or, and this is also really crucial, it picks up what Camilla was saying, they don't have a safe place at home to talk about what's going on for them. And this has been a massive problem around domestic violence, but also, and kind of picking up on what Bianca was saying too, other marginalized groups, LGBTQ plus people in particular, who perhaps aren't able to be out at home, aren't able to have places that validate their identity. I personally know someone who didn't have, a trans young person who didn't have access to Wi-Fi where they were living. They were living at a youth hostel because they had been kicked out of home, and they ended up taking their life at the beginning of the pandemic because they were so isolated. So digital exclusion is life-threatening, actually, and it's tremendously important that we talk about the fact that internet is a utility now in the modern world that we live in, just as much as water, just as much as electricity. And I think the cost of people not having access to the digital world is tremendous and often made invisible. So yeah, it's something I'm really passionate about in terms of reaching out to people who don't have access. So in response to this concern that people were falling through the gaps, we were missing people that weren't able to attend our groups, we created a whole new service. It's our befriending service. And that originally was to catch those people. And so they would be matched with a volunteer who calls them once a week and just checks in, offers support, offers encouragement. Maybe they set little goals together to help them work on whatever they want to develop in their lives. And this has been extraordinarily popular. It's exploded. And we've been really fortunate to get some more funding in to support the development of it. And I think we have 55 people being supported every week by volunteers. And that's growing all the time. More and more people are coming forward. And it's not just people who are digitally excluded. Some people just feel that they get on better one-on-one and that they want that kind of support. But the reason it's there is to support those people who don't have access to the internet, and to help go some distance in supporting those people. So yeah, really important.
It's probably also worth noting that, of course, there's probably so much extra pressure on organisations like Changes or employees to support mental health, because informal support for a lot of people outside of the working place has just completely vanished, whether that's just, you know, being able to meet up with your friends or take part in a hobby. A lot of people can't do that anymore. So it must put a lot more pressure on employees to be able to, you know, provide that main support. Are there any, oh, sorry, Jess, did you want to say something?
No, the only thing I was going to sort of add to that was that I think for marginalized communities in particular, that's become an issue because there have not been spaces to be who you are. Or have a break from the oppression or the racism or the discrimination that we face. So in response to that, we have also opened more specialist groups during the lockdown. We've opened an LGBTQ plus group, which is really popular and a beautiful, like such a self-affirming space to be in. And we've also opened a women of color group, and that's been a really cherished space as well, where people are able to come and get a break from all of these compounded challenges of COVID and racism and so on, and connect with other people like them. So we've been doing more to create specialized spaces for people in response.
Yeah. So this is a question for everyone, whoever wants to take it first. Are there any particularly innovative ideas or strategies that employers you've seen or you yourselves are doing to ensure that to ensure the mental well-being of workforces?
I probably, knowing Bianca, direct this to her, but I think having mental health first aiders is something that shouldn't be optional anymore. I think, you know, every company will say, right, let's get some first aiders. We have to have first aiders. It's, you know, best practice compliance, but the exact same should go for mental health first aiders because it is crucial. You know, you have first aiders, you know, to deal with incidents that threaten your physical health, so that could be life-threatening, and the exact same goes for mental health as well. So we've invested a lot of money recently in mental health first aiders. We actually were due to have our cohort trained at the end of March last year, and then obviously that got cancelled. So we did it digitally instead. But it's invaluable to employers to have mental health first aiders who are able to support and signpost appropriately. But like I said, this is Bianca's area of expertise. So
Bianca, on to you.
Crazy. Well, I've been a mental health first aid instructor for 4 years, and I'm an associate. So what that means is I work directly for MHFA England for their corporate clients as well. So in Bristol, I run 2 open courses a month, which is virtual, and I get people from all sorts of different companies coming on. I get independent practitioners like coaches, for example. I also get independent people that have just got people that have been struggling, family members, and they want to learn how to help them. So I do two a month, and I also go into various companies and deliver this as well, and it will be face-to-face after June also. It's vital that workplaces do have mental health first aiders in place. However, the whole Health and Safety Act 1974 shouldn't just fall on mental health first aiders. We need to have things around the mental health first aiders to support them as well. And we also need to run an awareness through the company so that everybody's aware what mental health first aiders do. Everybody's got a baseline knowledge of mental health and well-being and can help somebody in the first instance by listening non-judgmentally and then signposting, because that's what a mental health first aider is. You're not a doctor. You listen, you support, you signpost, and you continue to encourage and support that person. That is skills that you need to learn by going on a course. Yes, it should be in the law. I agree, Daisy, it should. Physical first aid is 1 to 50 usually, depending on the workplace. You're more likely to come across somebody at the moment experiencing thoughts of suicide than having to do any physical first aid. But yet we haven't got mental health first aid in law yet, in the Health and Safety Act, unfortunately. So yeah, that's a bit disappointing, but a lot of work still needs to be done around that. But a good starting point is to have mental health first aiders, is to do the 4-hour half-day awareness so that everybody has an awareness around mental health, and then really implementing it after as a company and as a business, which I support a lot of companies to do, because you've just trained 16 mental health first aiders, they're back in the business. What do you do now? So it's about really getting it through the company to support people, particularly at the moment with people returning to the workplace as well. And again, everybody's had a very different COVID experience, right? So we need to have that conversation because everyone's unique and everyone's got different needs. But mental health first aiders, definitely a good place to start to support employee well-being.
Yeah, Camilla, have you come across anything particularly interesting?
Yeah, 2 things actually that are at different points, and again it's more towards women and people who identify as women. And first one is around people being able to have proper time off when they've experienced a miscarriage, and it's been in the news the last couple of weeks or so that more and more organisations are adopting policies, and I think this is where we move towards what is kind of best practice and actually what can be written into a company's policy of this is what we do. And so the first one is around miscarriages, but also other big life changes and things that happen to people really ought to be written into company policies, and people should be able to share with their employers when something is really major is happening in their life and they need the time away from work to process this in their own space. And the second thing is around menopause, and it's again something that's become really topical a lot more recently, thankfully. And menopause lasts for a very, very, very long time, and it's something that many would experience and suffer in silence, dare I say, because it's not being spoken about. And the toll of that on women's mental health in particular is absolutely huge. And it's I'm so happy that it's being spoken about more and more in the media at the moment, because again, it's I've heard lots of people speaking about it for the last couple of years, actually, more in like specialist events, if you like, but it's finally reaching the mainstream, which I think is absolutely amazing, actually. And I think it needs to be, as I say, the training for people, and I'd add into the mental health first aider is around suicide prevention as well. That we've just brought a new team member on board, and she was telling me that she did some suicide prevention training in her previous role and how life-changing it's been for her. More actually as a mum of teens as well, in terms of, the practicalities of, the work that Bianca does as well, is it goes beyond the workplace, in that, yes, it's, day to day it's going to help you, but actually it's for us to all recognise, and for employers to recognise, that these are life skills that we're giving people here. It's going to benefit you as an employer, but actually in life generally, these are things that we all ought to be doing. So yeah, those are the three things I've been speaking about and to other people quite a lot recently.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just looking at some of the questions that are coming in. We've got one question from Zoe, which is, as an employer, what are some clear prevention strategies to avoid burnout among my workforce? Jess.
I was hoping someone would ask that, because prevention really is the best way. And well, I mean, just kind of following on from what Camilla was saying, like, we teach people how to lift a box in the workplace, but we don't teach people how to have a conversation. Like, this is really crucial. So there's quite a lot of research to show that people experiencing positive emotions when they're dealing with adversity actually increases their resilience. So in like simple terms, that means have a laugh, like build in enjoyment, build in fun. When you start to see that there's a loss of humor or playfulness or joy in the workplace, that's definitely a warning sign. And so creating spaces where people can have fun in it as a team is really, really important. And also, one of the things that I like to do is building in a practice of what went well. So challenging people to think of 3 things that went well. Our brains are kind of programmed to remember the scary thing or the bad thing or the dangerous thing. And that, well, especially when it feels like there's so much danger and scariness around us, especially if we listen to a lot of the news, it can feel really overwhelming. So training our brain to notice positive things actually builds more positive things, because we're teaching ourselves to be aware of what works well and what is good. Also, I mean, I think getting innovative about the way that we work, and this isn't going to be possible for everyone, but even things like walking meetings, encourage your staff team, if they can meet up, go for a walk in the park and hash something out. There's some research that's emerging to suggest that the combination of fresh air and change of scenery and just moving your body can stimulate more productivity, better communication, more creativity. So those things are really kind of exciting ways to foster wellness and well-being in the workplace, so you're not always firefighting. So yeah, those are the few things I would mention to just kind of be resilience.
Bianca, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm thinking of this with my kind of consultant head on. So if an employer asks me, what do I do? And yes, it's all about prevention, 100%. So we need to know where we are, to know what the gap is, to then fill the gap. So my starting point with most companies is to do a simple survey, Survey Monkey, ask people what they would like more of, what they're experiencing, or do 360-degree feedback, anonymous as well, because then you'll get the truth. Yeah, people who don't do anonymous surveys, you're not going to get the truth of where your employees are at, and what the real pinch points or stress points are as well. Once you know where you're at, you can then start to fill in the gaps with wellbeing strategies or other initiatives. But what I see at the moment is panic stations. I see a lot of companies doing all sorts of things and great initiatives like Laughing Yoga Group and all these kind of great things which are brilliant. But what we need to do before we do all these sorts of things is actually ask your employees what they need, what they want to support their well-being and their mental health right now. So that would be my first port of call in regards to that question, is do some sort of survey anonymously or a focus group even, and find out what the pinch points are, because then you know what you're doing, you know the gaps you've got to fill. So that would be my consultant business brain there, of where to start first.
Thank you. Camilla?
I'm just putting my other past life hat on. So I used to head up comms and culture for some big companies, and I think what Bianca said really triggered actually is the speak to your people, especially speak to the more marginalized voices within your organization. I was always very aware that me as a white middle-class woman, I am not representative of a lot of the people that were working in the organization. And I've hopefully over the years got even better. I'd like to think I've always been pretty good of having the humility to listen to other people who are experiencing different, life and work in a very different way to you, and listen to what they're telling you, really listen to it, and then ask them what they would like, what can we do to help? So, we were always quite a sociable company, this one that I worked at for quite a long time, and there were people that absolutely hated socializing, like genuinely couldn't think of anything worse, of like, do not put me in a room. It's like, okay, well, what would make life better for you? I'd like to form a cinema club where, subsidized tickets go to the cinema for a few of us, and then we can meet afterwards in a group of 5 or 6 and we can talk about it. Amazing, let's do that then. And so it's just, don't have this one size fits all, because it's never ever going to be the case at all. So yes, really just backing up what Bianca says, is like, listen to your people, but make sure you're pulling in the voices that are very different to your own as well, and make sure you action as well. So don't just listen and say yeah, and then go away and just do what you wanted to do anyway, because that's horrendous too. So listen and take action.
Yeah, thank you. And Daisy, did you have anything to add before we move on?
Not particularly. I think we've kind of covered most of it, but I guess in terms of preventative measures is to make sure that if you're going to be able to offer some support, that you have that written down in policy. So if somebody is going to come and ask you for help, they know exactly what help they're able to get from you. So we partner with the Retail Trust, who offer an employee assistance program. They're a charity, and they work to support the well-being of people who work in retail. So we therefore have that in our policies. We have their contact details, we have what they do, how they do it. It's totally anonymous, to make sure that everybody has the information that they need should they then wish to go and seek that support. I just think it's really important to have a clear, laid out and accessible place for people to go and find that support should they need it, without necessarily having to have a conversation, because that might be half the battle for quite a few people.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we are running out of time, but I just would love to quickly go around each and every one of you and ask to quickly summarize what you would like to see change for the better, and if you're feeling optimistic about where we're headed in terms of workforce and mental health. So whoever wants to start, please do. Yeah.
It's been a hell of a year, and I feel that we are a nation of resilient, adaptable, proactive people. And I tell you what, coming out of this, we're going to be stronger than ever. So that's the positives there. For me personally, always doing kind of mental health and well-being resilience training, and now being fortunate enough to be able to add on, race and racism in there, so passion and purpose coming together. I would like to see a lot more organizations do something in regards to understanding actually the different impact that this may have had on their Black and brown employees, because it's important, and we have a duty of care to look after everybody's mental health and well-being.
Yeah, thank you. Jess, what about you?
I feel a lot more optimistic after this conversation, I have to say. I feel like the world is a better place. I think employers continuing to focus on the importance of mental health and kind of holistic well-being is really crucial. We know that absenteeism has a huge cost to the organization, but also presenteeism costs, I think, 1.8 times more than absenteeism. So when people are showing up and they really shouldn't be there, it actually does more damage. And so seeing employers allowing space for their employees to not be okay, I think is important. And getting really clear about priorities. I want to see more managers saying to their managers, what are the absolute priorities you need my team to get done by the end of the week? And pushing back up so that people kind of, I guess, lower down the chain don't end up holding the burden. I think that's really important. I'm really excited about this opportunity that we have for people to work differently, for people to live wherever they want in the world and still work with their team, for people to schedule their day so they get in their mid-morning yoga class, whatever it is. I think that's really exciting and lends itself to more joy in our world, which is always a good thing. So I am excited. I'm aware of the pressure, and I think that we've seen a massive increase in the amount of people accessing our services and using and valuing peer support. And I think we need to remember that those places are there. You're never alone, no matter what you're feeling, you're never alone. And there's always going to be someone on the end of a phone or a Zoom call who can actually offer some solidarity and some validation. So hopefully we're in this time of great disconnection, we're actually becoming really innovative and skilled at building that connection for ourselves.
Yeah, Daisy, would you agree?
I do. I'll be cautiously optimistic. When I first started researching mental health and well-being at work, it was about 7 years ago now, and there were four papers about it in the world of theoretical university studies, and that was it. Whereas now there are hundreds and thousands, there are so many. So we've come a long way in a short space of time. And, I say cautiously optimistic because we've seen quite a sharp peak in it being a trend. And I just think that everyone needs to realize that self-care is not sitting in the back with a glass of wine and some candles. It might be for some people, but actually sometimes self-care is a little bit more like, have the nap, or say no, or don't do things that don't make you feel good, and it's just about not having the shiny surface of self-care and well-being, but also being able to bring it down to a much more grounded, deeper level and continue it then for a longer period of time rather than it becoming a trend. So cautiously optimistic. Lots of people know about it. Lots of people are doing things to make themselves feel well and feel better, but let's not let that momentum end with COVID. This needs to be an ongoing trend, not just a fashion statement.
Yeah, completely. Camilla?
I would like some of the positives in terms of the good bits of what we've learned over the last year and a half, and there are elements that are helping, I hope in the longer run will help reduce social inequality for certain groups who up until now have not been able to access employment in the same way, and that some of these changes actually have been good, and I'd like to see some of that staying, so that, as I say, workplaces for mums, obviously we talk about, but Jess mentioned about disabled people, some workplaces have become more accessible actually, and I think that's a really positive thing that really I'd like to see it carrying through. I guess from an employer's perspective going forwards, it's just around treating people as individuals. So really, really taking the time to understand the challenges that everybody within your workforce are facing, and coming up with strategies to move forward. So don't rush it. Don't assume, oh, everyone needs to come back to the office now, or everyone stays working from home. Speak to your people, find out what's going on for them and what's going to work for them, and then adjust things. So keep it flexible, and that's not flexible working, it's flexible policies that adapt for individual circumstances, because the next year and a half coming out of this, or when it's going to take longer than that, is going to be a really, really interesting time, and employers need to keep an open mind and need to stay agile, I would say, in terms of where they kind of start to mandate things, and don't go back to normal, and like whatever normal was, don't go back to that.
Yeah, great. Well, we've run out of time, so I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of our amazing panelists who joined us today. That was a really interesting conversation, and I'm definitely feeling a bit optimistic knowing that you're all doing the work that you're doing. So yeah, that was very insightful. Thank you so much. So thank you to everyone watching, the panelists, everyone who was working on this event today. If you enjoyed this event, make sure you keep an eye out for our future Bristol 24/7 Presents events. The next one's going to be on July 8th and looks at how Bristol's innovators can fast forward our economic recovery. So thank you very much again, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it, and goodbye.
Am I allowed to go now?
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.